Uh, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jeremy Woodward, who has kindly agreed to today's talk. It's a talk which is very much at the heart of what the Sid Vale Association is all about. Jeremy's has given me a description of his previous life, and he read history at the University of Manchester, and he was, I think, offered a post in the early heritage industry of Manchester, which he turned down, and instead he went on to the continent. This wasn't a grand tour, I don't think. He taught English as a foreign language, but eventually returned to this country and has lived in Sidmouth for about 20 years, and amongst other things teaches at the Sidmouth International School. He was a founding member of the Vision Group for Sidmouth and was on the steering group of the Sid Valley Neighbourhood Plan. He reminded me that for as long as 7 years, he has been working on the listing of local heritage assets. And I should say that this has been one of the most difficult titles that we've ever had to come up with for an SVA talk, so that people could understand it or be attracted to come to the talk. It's slightly complicated, but Jeremy is going to make it all very straightforward. And thank you very much indeed for coming to talk to us. Over to you now, Jeremy.
Yes, thank you very much, Nigel. Well, it is a complicated, complex thing, and I hope I can guide you all through the complexities. Let me just give you a rough summary of things to come. I'll take you through my sections first. So the first part, asking whether we should protect local heritage, not nationally listed. I'm going to take you through 4 different types of property to give you some sort of idea of what we're talking about. Because as we can see, let me just toggle this to the top. As we can see, it can get very complicated with different rules and regulations. This section, I'm going to be giving you rather a lot of text, so apologies in advance, but just to try and show you what it's all about. The next section, I'm going to be taking you back to some practical examples. I'm going to take you through some campaigns, as it were, over the last 20 years to, again, try and illustrate what we mean by local heritage. And then my final thoughts, basically, heritage is entangled with all sorts of other issues, but ultimately it's about a sense of place, I would say. Well, let me take you to one of the most important places in Sidmouth, and this is the seafront, of course. It's forming the poster, actually. I've taken it from the poster for today's event. And on the far right, you've got the Mocha, which is a grade 2 listed building. And going past the seafront hotels, the Elizabeth and the Devore, and these are not listed, but they have various protections, including conservation area status, and they are hotel accommodation areas, which also has some sort of protection. And behind that, we've got the grade 1 listed Norman Tower, of course. I'm going to take us back, though. I'm going to start rather with the flat above the Mocha there, because the 4 houses I'm going to be taking us through to illustrate different types of heritage asset in the Sid Valley starts there, because this is where my wife and I first started our life in Sidmouth some 20 years ago. And this is a listed building. It's very prominent. We were very privileged to live there for about 2-3 years. But my point here is when we left, we passing by the property, we noticed that the balustrades had been replaced with something rather modern and not actually, in my opinion, fitting a Regency property. I contacted the conservation officer who said, that doesn't seem to be right, and asked the proprietor to put back the original balustrade. My point here being that eternal vigilance is actually necessary when it comes to any sort of listing. It's all very well having a grade 2 list there, but if it isn't adhered to, then frankly, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Yes, of course, the proprietor couldn't bulldoze the place, but it's these small changes that I think are detrimental to the character. As far as limited resources are concerned, yes, conservation officers don't have the time to deal with everything. And this is a constant problem that we'll be looking at throughout the talk, that you can't be bothering conservation officers with every single thing. We then moved up the valley to Temple Street, to another listed building. Again, a real privilege to be there, a wonderful building with a lot of history. This photograph is from the Historic England website. Apologies for the quality, but that's what they've got up there. More or less opposite this cottage on Temple Street, we've got another listed building, Valence's Brewery. Well, it is no longer there because back in the 70s it was listed, but then that was bulldozed and a block of flats put in its place. Now you could say back in the 70s people weren't so concerned, so bothered. One would hope this couldn't happen today, but nevertheless, the title up there, Disregarding Norms, the haphazard nature of listing. If the political will and the determination of the locals, as it were, is not strong enough, then again, these listing regimes are not that solid, frankly. And on a personal note, when we left Temple Street, we later learned that the proprietor took down a half-timbered shed at the back of the property there. It was an ancient structure, wonderful character. The excuse, I think, being health and safety. There's now a carport there. Again, a real shame, another piece of erosion of character as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, we moved up the road to Livonia Road. This is a 1930s property, probably not worth listing in any way. But I do want to highlight a couple of interesting things to you. The natural context and natural contours, well, we've got the Woolbrook behind there, and indeed Livonia Road does follow the contour of the river, the brook rather, yeah, you see it running there. And much of suburbia, indeed many towns, the roads follow, of course, farm tracks or other features that were already there. And behind, on the other side of the Woolbrook, you've got the 6-7 foot high brick wall of the original Limebourne estate, which is still intact. That has no protection, but it's a wonderful piece of our local heritage. Talking of walls, though, along much of Livonia Road, we have these charming front walls to people's gardens. Unfortunately, they are slowly disappearing as they collapse or people want them to be replaced. Again, a shame, I think, because it does give character to the street, something charming to suburbia. And I think we do overlook suburbia. Most of us actually live there. We shouldn't poo-poo it as a place devoid of heritage. There is a lot there that is perhaps unnoticed, but we need to perhaps notice a little bit more. Well, we moved further up the road and to the place we are in now, at the very, very edge of Sid Ford, and that is Harkham Lane, a 60s bungalow. But again, you've got natural context and natural contours. Behind there, you've got the Snod Brook. And here on a map, you can see the brook and the original farm track that follows it more or less. There are several Devon banks still intact of interest, and we've got some more walls. So here we have these dinky little walls in people's front gardens. Again, I think they add a lot of charm. These cannot be pulled down because according to the title deeds of the properties along here, these walls have to remain intact. So people might complain about the rules and regulations that the government impose upon us, but actually these are private contracts that determine what we can do with our own property. Yeah, so I've taken you very quickly through very different types of property and areas in the Sid Valley, from nationally listed to unlisted, from the grand to the small, but they all add up to these layers of heritage. I'm now going to take you through the rules and regulations that govern a lot of our heritage. And I'm going to start with the graded, nationally graded listed buildings overseen by Historic England. And I think it's something we can be proud of, that the Sid Valley has more listed buildings of any place in Devon, apart from Exeter, which is quite something really. And that then begs the question, if you've got all these officially nationally listed treasures, how many unlisted things of merit when it comes to heritage are there that we need to be taking note of? Well, I'm going to take this, of course, to Wikipedia, apologies, but I think it's quite a good way to understand the complexity of all of this. There's going to be some text following, apologies, but I do think it will help us to work out our way through the myriad complexities. So I'm going to read this out to you. In the UK, the process of protecting the built historic environment, that is, getting a heritage asset legally protected, is called designation. To complicate things, several different terms are used because the processes use separate legislation. Buildings are listed, ancient monuments are scheduled, wrecks are protected, and battlefields, gardens, and parks are registered. A heritage asset is a part of the historic environment that is valued because of its historic, archaeological, architectural, or artistic interest. Only some of these are judged to be important enough to have extra legal protection through designation. However, buildings that are not formally listed but still judged as being of heritage interest are still regarded as being a material consideration in the planning process. Now there you've got quite a lot of jargon that appears in the planning process, because ultimately this is about planning, what you can put up and what you are allowed to take down. So things like designation, what is listed or registered, historic environment, and so on. Wikipedia has taken this from, in fact, a government website, the Culture Ministry. I'm now going to take you on to what English Heritage has to say about listed buildings. And I think this is quite helpful, actually, to give us that basic understanding of things. So, listing marks and celebrates a building's special architectural and historical interest, and also brings it under the consideration of the planning system, there we go again, so it can be protected for future generations. Listing is not a preservation order preventing change. It does not freeze a building in time. It simply means that listed building consent must be applied for in order to make any changes to that building. listed buildings can be altered, extended, and sometimes even demolished within government planning guidance. The local authority uses listed building consent to make decisions that balance the site's historic significance against other issues. So yes, even listed buildings are not sacred. They can be changed. And I think a lot of people are hesitant about taking on a listed building because they think they're going to be told you can't do this, you can't do that. Yes, there are limitations. And we have met the SVA in our last 7 years, some sensitivity over even local listing, people thinking, oh, we don't want to be locally listed because that will mean we can't do whatever we want to do with our property. Well, that's not the case. You can. You need to respect certain guidance, etc. And that's where I'm taking you just now. At the top, though, of the sort of planning ladder when it comes to rules and regulations, we've got the National Planning Policy Framework, agreed, the last thing was 2019. And they do put heritage there in the center of things, which is satisfying. So a heritage asset is defined by central government in the NPPF as a building, monument, site, place, area, or landscape identified as having a degree of significance meriting consideration in planning decisions. I mean, it's again all about planning because of its heritage interest. And this is important. It includes designated heritage assets, such as graded buildings, and assets identified by the local planning authority, including local listing. So there in the most important planning document in the land, it does say, yes, we need to take local listing into consideration. So the local planning authority that basically determines all planning decisions, except when it comes to airports or motorways, is the district council. And East Devon District Council, they have just embarked on a new local plan. This is the working draft, which went out last month. And there they put heritage fairly centrally, which is good. I think this is important too. And apologies, I'm repeating myself to some degree, but I think it does help. It certainly helps me to have certain of these key terms repeated, just so that we understand what they're all about. So bear with me. Heritage assets may be classified as either designated or non-designated, and the importance of both can be taken into account through the planning process. Heritage assets can include listed buildings, scheduled monuments, conservation areas, registered parks and gardens, archaeological sites, and other assets. Okay. The majority of heritage assets in East Devon, whether buildings, archaeological sites, or areas of historic and landscape character, do not have a statutory designation. They are not covered by conservation areas or by listed building designation. And so their conservation relies on the planning system and positive management by land and property owners. So again, going back to, it's ultimately the decision of local politicians, councillors who are on planning committees, and on property owners, but I would also say the wider public, keeping an eye on these things, being knowledgeable as far as they can, which is the point of talks like this, and to keep an eye on our heritage environment. Well, one very important aspect are conservation areas, and Sidmouth has 4. So we've got the town centre one there. We have the Bickwell Valley up there. We've got Elysian Fields there, and the area covering so-called central Sidmouth with the Byes, etc., and going up into Sid Ford. What strikes me, though, looking at this map, this is my opinion, is conveniently the knoll sits between three conservation areas. Now, the conservation areas were put together in the early 1970s. The district council found new headquarters just before then, and they probably didn't want to be encumbered by the inconvenience of being in a conservation area. Because if we read down here, courtesy of East Devon's own conservation area text, any development in a conservation area would need to preserve or enhance the character of the area and may require planning permission and/or planning permission for demolition in such a conservation area. So yeah, conservation areas are important. Now, my next text, I must apologize. It is one of those horrible, turgid, local pieces of regulation that send people running and screaming from the room. So please don't. I think it's important, though, to show you this. Well, let me show it to you. It's all jargon, which I still find it difficult getting my head around. Supplementary plans and development and design briefs. Sidmouth Town Centre Conservation Area. Okay, so we're focusing on the town centre conservation area. And here we're looking at shop fronts. So looking after all those wonderful shop fronts. So shop front practice notes. These were produced for the Sidmouth Conservation Area in 1988. The aims of improving the appearance of the town centre and raising the quality of shopfront development. And the notes were adopted as supplementary planning guidance by us in 2002 and are used in the determination of planning applications. Now, I'm going to be referring to this in a practical example later. They've been ignored, these notes. And I would suggest that a reason for a lot of this being ignored is because they're not known, because they are so turgid and impenetrable and unattractive, and people just don't want to know, they switch off. And if you're uninformed, then I would say you're going to be misled. Another similar piece of local regulation, another mouthful that I can never remember, principal holiday accommodation areas, which is basically that yellow-orange area at the front, the esplanade, covering all the hotels. This is from the current local plan. We're getting a new one coming in, of course. And as it says in that text, within the principal holiday accommodation areas as identified on the proposals map, this map here, the change of use or redevelopment of hotels and other forms of holiday accommodation to non-tourism accommodation uses will not be permitted unless ... And of course, all these caveats and unless clauses, this is where the problems arise. And I'll be showing you an example of that later. Well, at the bottom of the heap, as it were, is the neighbourhood plan. Now, I sat on the steering group of the Sid Valley Neighbourhood Plan. Very interesting, enjoyable, stimulating time that was. As the Localism Act of 2011 says, that introduced neighbourhood planning, this gives people greater power to influence development within their local area and to consider the impact of proposals upon heritage assets. So in other words, a neighbourhood plan should be considered by the planning authority, but also the town council's planning committee when it comes to any planning application that might affect a heritage asset, whether it's official or not. And it is being referred to, actually. So despite any cynicism I might have of these things, the neighbourhood plan is being taken seriously as a planning document when it comes to looking after our heritage. There's a particularly interesting document that might be more penetrable for the general public, though. In fact, it's, I think, a fantastic read. It's really full of rich detail about the Sid Valley. Many of us don't know about it. And that's the Sid Valley Place Analysis. What is that? Well, in December 2016, Creating Excellence, a consulting company, were commissioned by the steering group to prepare a place analysis to inform the development of the neighbourhood plan. This study is aimed at helping to answer the question, how can new development in the Sid Valley support and enhance the unique character of the parish? Now, to do this, the urban structure of the Sid Valley parish and settlements has been analysed to help uncover what makes the parish and settlements recognisable as a distinct and memorable place. And I think this is really the point of any heritage, whether natural or built, man-made, is what makes it distinct, what makes it unique, what gives it character. And that's what we want to be looking after. I'm just going to take you to this document very briefly. It is a fantastic read. I really would urge you to look through it. Yes, you've got a lot of text, but there are maps and a lot of interesting talk about character, what makes it distinctive, looking at the history, but so much more. It really is a powerful document which says a lot about why we cherish where we live. But I just want to finish my nod to the neighbourhood plan by saying that certain specific things were included in that and which are being referred to by planning committees, and that is flint walls. Yeah, so there is community action, so-called, to maintain and preserve the existing flint walls in the Sid Valley. That flint wall is up on Peak Hill. I think it's on the bend there. I've taken it from Google Maps, not a very good photo, but flint walls should certainly be protected in the Sid Valley. Yeah, they are clearly an asset that we need to be looking after. I'm going to finish this section, though, by taking us to perhaps the most important aspect when it comes to this talk, certainly, and that is what East Devon started doing in 2019, putting together their heritage strategy. They asked for the SVA to input into that. It was a consultation document, and hurrah, 6 months later, they came up with their guide to the listing of local heritage assets in East Devon. So we have a mechanism for listing local heritage assets. And this is what they say about it. Local lists only deal with the things that are locally important. The purpose of the list is to identify high quality, locally significant built or landscape features which are not subject to any other heritage designation, such as statutory listing. It is often the things that are not significant on a national scale that make the biggest contribution to the distinctiveness of a local area. And that is what we hope to capture by supporting local listing. Hooray. Yeah, so excellent that the conservation officer and her team put this together. So when a planning application is considered, the implications of the locally listed asset and its setting will be taken into account when the decision is made. However, inclusion on the list will not automatically mean refusal of any application that involves alteration or loss. It's not automatically so. Yeah. There is a formal form to fill in if you want to nominate an asset that you think should be on that list. And our colleagues, the Otter Valley Association next door, they have already started that. And indeed, they've got here, as we can see, a few things on the list that's been recognized. In East Butley, you can see this is a summary of what's already on the local list. Now, there's nothing there from the Sid Valley because in 2020, the pandemic hit and basically everything is frozen to a halt. Yeah, I'm going to be coming back to local listing in a moment with some more practical examples, because that's where I'm going to be taking you now after that long list of different local rules and regulations. I'm going to take you through some local heritage campaigns that I've been involved in, which I think illustrate the issues around what we mean by trying to look after, preserve local heritage. And I'm going to start with this area here on Hillside. This is the area of Coast Guards cottages built in the 1860s, 70s. And one in particular that came to my attention because I walk my dog up there regularly in about 2004, I think. This is the Chief Coast Guard's cottage called Coastlands, put up for sale, plans to demolish it and replace it with a block of flats. There was a huge local uproar, campaigns. I was involved in that. I even contacted, I think for the first time, maybe not the first time, the conservation officer asking, well, could this area be actually made into a small conservation area? He said, sorry, that's not going to happen. I also approached the local government ombudsman, didn't work. But finally, what did work was that it was because of the property crash in 2008, it was bought by a local couple who put proposals to the planning committee for some changes. The planning committee didn't like them, but the couple said, well, you can either have these or a block of flats, what would you prefer? And that's what it looks like today. It hasn't been completely destroyed, certainly not. You've still got the chimneys, you've still got the character. It's been altered. It's still standing, at least you could say. Now, the question is whether, if there'd been a local list in operation back then, whether it would have been under the threat of demolition, I don't know. The Sidmouth Planning Committee at the time didn't seem to be too bothered. Its political will and the luck actually here of somebody taking it on that worked. I'm going to take you to Knights, but before we do that, here's somebody in praise of Sidmouth's glorious shop fronts and a photo from of Stags, another offset window, but this time with a little arcade. The shoppers could walk into to look at the window display. It took them even further along towards the door. Now, this is what Knights was, but on a grander scale. Here's a rather poor photo of what Knights, the ladies' wear shop, used to look like. And here there were a couple of arcades where you could penetrate and look through the windows, quite magical. This is what it looks like today. The arcades have disappeared. A real shame. Here we've got somebody who took photos of those original arcades back in 2010, I think, who voiced dismay that they were going to disappear. I did have my 3 minutes at the planning committee at the time to say, look, what are you doing allowing the destruction of this? We've got a couple of these Art Nouveau panels on the front of today's shop, but the regulation that I showed you earlier, which should be looking after the shop fronts of Sidmouth, this was ignored. Again, whether a local listing of this property would have saved its shop front, I don't know. But again, I don't think the political will or interest was there. Yeah. We come to something even more controversial, and that is what was Fortfield Hotel. Now, I put together the Futures Forum of the Vision Group of Sidmouth blog back in 2013, a whole piece on what happened to it. This is what has replaced Fort Field Hotel. There were huge questions at the time, including this is not sustainable, that development. There is no possibility that the carbon impact of new build will represent a carbon saving on the next few hundred years. Nobody liked the design. There were negotiations for about 6 years to pull these flats down. And then, oops, so 2 fires happened. And the whole lot was burnt to the ground, quite conveniently, some could say, et cetera, et cetera. It was really a point of dismay from Sidmouth, especially from the hoteliers and councillors who pointed out that, so the Sidmouth District Hospitality Association pointed out, well, the whole seafront should be protected. Why are you allowing a hotel to become flats? This is against your own rules and regulations. What's happening here? But it was allowed. I suppose once a building has been burnt to the ground, there's not much you can do about it. Yeah. So that was quite a real shame. Again, whether local listing could have saved it, it would have been another layer of protection, perhaps. But I'm going to take you to the granddaddy of local campaigns this last 20 years, and that is around Knoll. I tried unsuccessfully 10 years ago now to have it listed as a grade 2 nationally recognized building. I was warned by Julia Creek, who's the grand dame of local history, and she's behind the blue plaques of Sidmouth, that it wouldn't work, and it was proved right. It did have, I would say, 2 effects. Firstly, the huge political noise around this. We ended up in private eye, nooks and corners. So nationally, there was a lot of dismay that this would be allowed to be pulled down. But personally, it led me, through all my researches on this building, into echoes, possibilities of local listing. I learned back in 2010, 2012 about something called a local list. Yeah, I approached the SVA's nascent history group. They've just set up, and I asked colleagues there, do you know anything about a local list for Sidmouth? And there was some discussion and some unearthing of documents, and a small delegation of us went to see the conservation officer. He was very open, very reasonable, and he said, well, yes, actually, I've got this interesting document for you, and this is a list of the former grade 3 listing before 1973. So in 1973, we had grades 1 and 2, grade 3 were dismissed, and many local authorities then incorporated this as their local list. This was never formally done though, but nevertheless, informally, we had a local list. Now, if I take you down to Sidmouth, we've got some nice walls there, but if I take you down here, very interesting, the Sidmouth Urban District Council, as it was back then, officers were on that list. We asked the conservation officer then, well, could we take away this list, please, and beef it up, as it were? Yes, good. Shall we put together some sort of pro forma where we can decide on the different categories, different things to look for for locally listing. He said, yes, good idea. And so that's what we embarked on. We then created some forms and took those initial former grade 3 listed properties, here you are, and this is the example for no that we did. This is back in 2014. And there you have things like designation, age, condition, current use, historic integrity, etc. Much of this matches, incidentally, what we've got now as part of the District Council's current system. So a lot of this could be put on to the new system. Yeah. So a lot of enthusiasm there. We then discovered that the SVA had added to this list back in the 1980s about 100, 120 properties. We did the same, filling in these forms. Meanwhile, our colleagues, the Otter Valley Association, launched their campaign. We launched our local consultation in the local library to ask if people wanted to add to that, and we got another dozen or so. There was a huge amount of frustration, though, because again and again, and here's the OVA, the Otter Valley Association, saying for the third time since 2016, EDC has postponed the long-promised formal review of the local parish assets list by the Strategic Planning Committee. So we were working on the ground, but there wasn't the official okay to get this list done. Yeah, which was very frustrating. But then, yes, finally, the council said, yes, we're okay for a local heritage policy. And then we got this guide together for the listing of local heritage assets. And then we embarked on various things, including some training sessions. So the OVA and the SVA did some joint things, and Nigel and Richard Thurlow attended a session in 2019, autumn, I think. And then, of course, boom, the pandemic came in and has pretty much halted everything, really. But it's there, ready and waiting for us to get going with. So if anybody out there is interested in taking part in the listing of local heritage assets, please do get in touch. We'll need lots of volunteers to go out and assess properties, assets to put on a nomination form. Yeah, well, I'm going to finish with some final thoughts with you. And very briefly, I just want to say that heritage can't be simply put in the box. It's not heritage on its own. It's entangled with all sorts of other things. So, for example, we've got Alma Bridge, a Sampson designed construction. Our local architect from 100 years or so. Here it is. It happens to be also at Pennington Point, the ravages of the sea. And that's part of an international designation, the World Heritage Site. And this conflict between the World Heritage Site and local heritage has unfortunately stopped anything from being done these last 15, 20 years with our beach management plan. And so we have had to say goodbye to this piece of local heritage simply because Pennington Point couldn't be saved, as it were. A real shame, I think. Maybe more should have been done. Yeah. Local heritage is certainly important to the local economy. English Heritage has put together a substantial material on recognizing that, and I think the Chamber of Commerce in Sidmouth really are keen on heritage for exactly that. It brings in tourists as well as something we locals can appreciate. You've got climate change. Britain's got, with its housing stock, the oldest in Europe. We will need to be spending a lot of money to insulate our ancient buildings, and this will have an effect on sensitivities around heritage. But I want to take you to more street furniture, and that is lampposts. I did, some 15 years ago, actually complain to the Devon County Council officer who was in charge of putting up these rather hideous replacement street lights, saying, well, why are you taking away what were quite charming things? And he said asbestos, maybe. But actually what they've done recently, so here's Salcombe Road, these charming old lampposts remain, but you've got your LED bulbs up there. So it is possible to marry concerns for energy and heritage. Another point would be how heritage, the built environment, as it were, very often correlates with the natural environment. And I'm going to point you to another good read, and that's Ed Dolphin's fascinating study of the Valley's wildflowers. And he touches many, many times in this document on Devon banks, on hedgerows, on the heritage of our plant life. And the fact that we've got throughout the Sid Valley, but also within the town itself, a lot of green lane. So this charming little gem hidden behind Sidmouth College. Again, I would go up there with my dog quite regularly. This is not listed, it's not actually protected. Devon banks perhaps are, but these aspects of our heritage certainly need perhaps a bit more notice. There's one final point though, and that's so-called intangible heritage assets. These are not touched upon by local planning. Local planners are not interested in folk festival or heritage crafts or storytelling, but maybe we as a community, we would want them to be on some sort of list as things that we value, we cherish. So yeah, heritage assets go well beyond buildings and lampposts and walls, don't they? Well, I'm going to finish by taking us, of course, to John Betjeman. This is his plaque up on in Connaught Gardens, but part of the same poem, still Sidmouth. I think it's a wonderful couple of lines. Let me read them out to you. Broad crescents basking in the summer sun. A sense of sea and holidays begun. Leisure to live and breathe and smell and look. Unfold for me this seaside history book. And that's the point. We've got this wonderful history book in front of us that we don't want diminishing. We want to respect. We want to look after. And that's actually our duty, I think, to do that. But I'm going to finish with one last person who took great stock in the importance of the leisure to live and breathe and smell and look. And that was the German cultural commentator, author Walter Benjamin in the 1920s, 1930s. He wrote this extraordinary tome on the Paris arcades. Yeah, we've lost nights in Paris, they've got their arcades. And he produced this wonderful list of basically street furniture, which are wonderful things to behold and wonderful things for us to, as I say, keep an eye on. And if they are nibbled away over time, we are diminishing our heritage, but also the world we live in. And that, I think, would be a great shame. And that's what creates the sense of place that we all cherish here in the Sid Valley, that we've come to live amongst. And as as visitors we no doubt came beforehand to enjoy. Well, I have overrun a little bit. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience. I'm just going to finish though by going from built environment to natural environment, and that's next month's SVA talk. This is going to be looking at local nature recovery action. The East Devon AONB Wildlife Officer Lindy Rich will be taking us through that. It's something that certainly is of great interest to another group I'm involved in, which is the Sid Valley Biodiversity Group. Nature recovery is something that central government is keen on, and we locally, we certainly need to be doing our bit. So that should be quite fascinating when Lindy takes us through what the East Devon AONB are doing there. Thank you very much. Nigel, back to you.
I hope I'm not muted. Can you hear me, Jeremy?
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for a very stimulating talk, which covered a huge amount of ground, literally, and made us and will make us think even more about where we live. I think that many of us have moved here rather than those that were born here, but many of us that have moved here, we've moved here because we are so fond of what we see when we explore the Sid Valley, and you've given us extra reasons why we have to be really vigilant and not wait for things to happen, but to try and influence what happens. And I think that it really was an extremely stimulating talk. Now, are there any questions? John, do you have any questions that have come? A number of people have commented what an excellent talk it is, Jeremy.
Thank you.
I'm seeing those in front of me. But if there are any questions, John, could you mention them to Jeremy? No questions?
Well, I can see there are a couple. I'm just running through the comments that are there. Thank you. For example, Hollow Way is one of these wonderful green lanes, and they are splendid. Devon has got a lot of them. The Sid Valley certainly, and we've got within suburbia a lot of them, which does add to the charm. It's tucked away, and it's these sort of everyday elements that we would notice if they were gone. And so this is the point of being vigilant, certainly. And so the Devon Gardens Trust, yes, they were actually quite important when it came to the Knoll application for grade 2 status, and they sent letters of support, and they're keen on looking after the gardens of Devon, certainly keep an interest in Sidmouth. So, and yes, they have their own local list of gardens. That's right. And excuse me, actually, the Knoll Parkland is one of those. That's right. Yes, being vigilant, and we need to certainly keep an eye on things, I think. I think the problem often, and being a local activist in many areas, I have noticed I feel that over the years of my involvement, because things often seem impenetrable and overcomplicated, a lot of jargon, it does put people off. They think, well, I just don't understand this. I want to get on with my life, leave it to others, and then it's often too late. And on the other hand, to be kind to our local politicians and officers who are there actually as dedicated people who are well informed, they would like their community, their stakeholders, whatever we want to call us, to be better informed, to know what's going on, so that they can engage with people who actually live here in terms of what's important to us. Yeah, so we'll look around more carefully. Yes, it's those little things. I had a friend, perhaps I shouldn't be encouraging this. I had a friend who said you shouldn't be looking at shop window fronts. You should be looking up on what's above, because often that's a little bit more interesting. But it's those little corners that are what actually make a place charming, I would say. Yeah. Where can you find the local list? Whoops. Where can you find the local list? Well, it's there. If you go back to this, let me take you back. So here you can basically, yeah, there it is. No, sorry, that's the, yeah, here, this is the guide, which is up there. At the back of it, yeah, there is a form to fill in if you want to nominate something, yeah. So that's your assessment form. To see the actual list as it is now, that's it there. You can Google it under list of local heritage assets East Devon. It's not very full. It's basically East Budley, what the Otter Valley Trust have been working on. Yeah, the Sid Valley hasn't put anything up there yet. But that's where to find it. This talk will be available on the Sid Valley Association's website, certainly within a week. So if you want to go back over some of these references, they're there, and there are links to click on if you want to check something out. Yes. If you are uninformed, you will be misled. Yes, exactly. I think being informed, whatever it is, yeah, is the point really. Looking at Ed Dolphin's herbaceous survey, heck, the number of wildflowers in our hedgerows, in our Devon banks, just wasn't aware of that. And there's a lot of heritage there. He's comparing it with a document from the 1840s. Yeah, well, so that's very much part of our heritage.
I'll interrupt you there, Jeremy. Can you put me back to the very final slide again, please?
Yeah, sure.
You don't mind?
Oops, no, sorry. Wait. Taking you to the wrong thing, sorry.
My reason for interrupting is simply to mention, well, certainly to thank you again, to try and encourage people to join us on February the 9th to hear Linda Rich, who has only just been appointed to the East Devon AONB as a wildlife officer. And we look forward very much to hear what she has to say. But Jeremy has mentioned about Ed Dolphin, and as it happens, Ed is talking to us in May. So the second Wednesday in May, he will be talking to us about the very subject, about ancient woodlands in the Sid Valley. So what we're trying to do is to roughly have half the talks about social history and half the talks on natural history. That's the end of this afternoon's talk. Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy. And we look forward to seeing you on February the 9th. Thank you very much for coming. Goodbye.
Thank you very much indeed then. Okay, bye.